This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Some of my earliest memories from childhood are of myself parked in front of the TV, eyes glued to the screen for hours on end, watching a near constant stream of science fiction TV and movies. Everything from Star Trek to Thunderbirds, Battlestar Galactica to Doctor Who, Farscape, Stargate, Babylon 5, the list is endless. This is something I've mentioned before numerous times on this channel. However, there was one oddball British sitcom which I sometimes neglected to mention. It's clear to me now that this was a grave mistake, which I now aim to correct. Manchester-born duo Rob Grant and Doug Naylor first met in the late 1970s as students at the University of Liverpool. Grant was studying psychology while Naylor primarily focused on music. The two quickly found a mutual love of comedy, science fiction and writing, and by the early 80s they decided to drop out of higher education altogether to pursue careers as writers. They eventually found low-paying but steady work writing the BBC radio sketch shows Cliché and Son of Cliché. Though their work hadn't yet won them widespread acclaim among the general public, their reputations as punctual perfectionists did land them more work with the BBC and ITV as reliable comedy writers. The duo's real goal, however, was to pen and produce a sitcom of their own, but they didn't just want to make any old sitcom, they wanted a science fiction sitcom. The early seeds of what would later become Red Dwarf were planted in Son of Cliché with their sketch Dave Holland's Space Cadet, about the last surviving human aboard a spaceship with only his computer to talk to.
This is Dave Hollins, Stellar Trader Class D calling Earthcom 7 Beta 7. I'm still alone on the Melissa 5. The others are still dead. I'm still 7 trillion light years away from Earth. Yesterday, we hit a space storm. Acid rain, fireballs, meteors, radiation. Brightened up in the afternoon, though.
As they continued to work on the idea, the concept was refined to be about a character named Dave Lister, not alone with his computer, but also joined by the holographic simulation of his former supervisor Arnold Rimmer, and the mutant creature known only as Cat. Their first port of call in getting Red Dwarf off the ground was producer Paul Jackson. Jackson had found great success producing the groundbreaking series The Young Ones, and acquired a reputation in British television as simply being one of the best producers working. Jackson had brought Grant and Naylor onto several projects such as A Kick Up the 80s, Three of a Kind, and Carrot's Lib. Though Jackson believed the script for Red Dwarf was strong, he advised against pitching it to the BBC, who he said hated science fiction, and sure enough, it was rejected 3 times. Fans of classic Doctor Who will be familiar with how the BBC viewed science fiction during the 1980s. Controller of BBC One Michael Grade in particular saw the genre as something with only minority appeal, and that the BBC could never hope to match the lavish production values of Star Trek, Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica. Even though Red Dwarf was being pitched in the comedy/light entertainment departments, the presence of spaceships, mutants and robots led to it being similarly dismissed. That is until Paul Jackson took the script to commissioning editor Peter Ridsdale Scott.
I wanted something different, something unique. And I was beginning to despair when Paul Jackson said to me one day, read this. I think I got as far as page 4 where the cat shimmied round the corner as the cat did. And I laughed out loud. The most important thing is not the sci-fi, it's the situation the characters get themselves in and the quality of the comedy. And the comedy was excellent, I thought. And that's the story of why it came to Manchester and didn't go anywhere else.
Ultimately, Red Dwarf getting off the ground wasn't due to a change of heart among the BBC's higher-ups, but instead due to a quirk of budget allocation. In 1987, the team of Jackson, Grant and Naylor had produced and written the sitcom Happy Families to great success. Anticipating a second series, the BBC had already allocated the budget for Happy Families to return the next year, which the trio had no intention of making. But with a sitcom budget already allocated and a strong script championed by Jackson and Ridsdale Scott, The first series of Red Dwarf was begrudgingly green-lit. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the only tool you'll need to create a beautiful looking website for your business, portfolio, or online store. I used it to create my production company's website, and I didn't know the first thing about coding. I just found a template that worked for me and customized it using simple drag and drop tools. And now the process is even easier thanks to design intelligence. By combining 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise and cutting-edge AI technology, you can have a brand new website up and running literally within minutes. Everything from finding a template to integrating SEO can be personally tailored to your needs. Jump over to Squarespace using the link below to start building your website and use the coupon code Rowan J Coleman for 10% off your first purchase. When it came to casting their burgeoning sitcom, Grant and Naylor opted to find strong dramatic actors who could be funny rather than established comedians. To play the lead Dave Lister, they initially sought out a pre-Die Hard Alan Rickman. However, the person who ended up landing the role was a choice which came completely out of left field. Craig Charles was born in Liverpool 1964, expressing an interest in the creative arts from a very young age, winning a newspaper poetry competition when he was only 12 years old. In his teens and early 20s, he was extremely active in the local music and poetry scene, winning widespread recognition for his humorous, witty, and socially and politically charged poetry. His knack for live performance also saw him lead a brief stand-up comedy and theatre career. However, his acclaimed poetry soon led to appearances on television, with regular slots on Saturday Live and Wogan.
As I used to do poetry, sort of like angry young man poetry about Thatcher and the police and stuff like that.
Didn't ask if we'd been thieving or where we'd stashed the cash. Didn't take our fingerprints or stupid mugshot photographs. So anyway, he didn't bother doing none of that. He just jumped out the van and hit us on the head, got back into White Maria, and left us there for dead.
Paul Jackson, who was also a producer on Saturday Live, initially brought Charles into the Red Dwarf production to ask his opinion on whether the character of the cat was a racist stereotype. Charles opined that the cat was in fact a rather cool character, and after reading the script, he essentially begged Paul Jackson to audition for Dave Lister, despite having little to no acting experience whatsoever. As it turns out, Charles wasn't actually overly keen on the script itself, but wanted to be in Paul Jackson's good graces, in the hopes he may be offered a later role in a perceivably better series.
So I went to do a read-through, and first met Rob and Doug. Unbeknownst to me, there were 2 Mancunians. There's a historic antipathy between Mancunians and Scousers, you know. And I thought that there was no way on earth that these 2 Manchester lads would let the hero of their piece be a Scouser.
And it was a real problem. He did the best reading by a mile. We were told he'd never acted before, which was like, oh. And then he came back because we were really sure he hasn't really acted, but let's get him in again. And then his second reading was really bad.
I read that one really, really badly, you know, so I thought, oh God, I'm not going to get this, you know.
But by then we liked him so much, we were going, doesn't matter, he's never acted before. You know, it doesn't. We like him. We want Craig. We want Craig to be Lister.
And Paul Jackson came out and said, "You've got the gig."
The counterpart to Lister was the uptight and career-obsessed Arnold J Rimmer. Christopher Jonathan Brown was born in Hanover, West Germany, to a British military family. Brown found a talent for performing different voices and doing impressions, a talent which eventually landed him a regular part on the David Essex Showcase, impersonating various sports personalities. After registering with Actors Equity UK, Brown adopted the surname Barry and was henceforth known as Chris Barry on television. Like Craig Charles, he became a regular on Saturday Live, and Paul Jackson further utilised his vocal talents on the young ones. He also became a regular on Spitting Image, most well known for his impersonation of US President Ronald Reagan. Barry also appeared opposite Jennifer Saunders in Happy Families, and when he got wind of the Red Dwarf script, he asked to audition for Rimmer. Although Jackson, Grant and Naylor were all familiar with Barry's work, they were uncertain of his abilities as an actor. Instead, they championed Alfred Molina for the part. That is until Barry gave an incredibly impressive audition, and the production team saw a palpable chemistry between Barry and Charles. Therefore, he was cast as Arnold J Rimmer. The right actor for the cat was found early on in the audition process, when Danny John Jules arrived unbeknownst to him very late. His ignorance of his own tardiness, however, gave him an air of confidence and cool which so epitomised the writer's vision of the character. Danny John Jules also had very little acting experience. Instead, he primarily performed as a dancer on London's West End, and as part of the dance troupe Second Generation. After sitting through numerous other auditions from other candidates, Naylor, Grant and Jackson soon gave John Jules a call to tell him he had landed the part. Completing the initial foursome was the ship's computer, Holly. Norman Lovett was an established stand-up comedian at the time, having made a name for himself in the 70s and 80s. At first, the role of Holly was only to be a voiceover part, but in an admittedly ego-driven move, Norman Lovett demanded Holly be visible.
Initially, the money was low because it was a voiceover, so they can get away with paying you peanuts for that.
Norman had been banging on right from the start. He's saying, "Get my face on screen. That's the money."
So I kept moaning and whinging about this. I said, why have I got to do a voiceover in a TV show? Why can't you see this face? And why can't this computer called Holly look like this bloke here? By the time we'd recorded the 3rd episode of the first series, it had been agreed that we would see Holly and we'd go and reshoot some of the bits for the 1st and 2nd and 3rd episodes.
Playing Christine Kachansky at first was Alexandra Pig, but because of delays in getting the series started, she had to drop out due to scheduling conflicts. In her place was Scottish actress and musician Claire Grogan, known best at the time for the hit romantic comedy Gregory's Girl. To play Captain Hollister, Grant and Naylor were keen on finding an American actor to evoke the gravitas of the captains from Star Trek and other famous sci-fi shows. Mac MacDonald had been travelling Europe performing in various ways throughout the 1970s, and had risen to prominence in Britain's alternative comedy circuit in the group The Chip Shop Show. By the time he landed Red Dwarf, MacDonald had already made some brief appearances in several famous sci-fi features, such as The Empire Strikes Back and Aliens. With the cast secured, production on Red Dwarf soldiered ahead at BBC Manchester. The studio space, however, was less than adequate for the ambitious science fiction series. The only other production housed at the studio was Question of Sport, and so a production crew who were used to running a sports panel and quiz show were now tasked with creating convincing spaceship interiors and, what were for a BBC sitcom, elaborate special and visual effects. Creating the sets for the show proved to be a massive headache for Grant and Naylor, who were very hands-on as writers, which was highly unusual for the time. Although they had initially envisioned sets resembling those in Alien, they met production designer Paul Montague halfway to instead go for a submarine aesthetic.
I was slightly obsessed at the beginning without having too much colour into the first series because we wanted to try and create the ironmongery look. But in actual fact, because it's a sitcom and there's blanket lighting and you can't get round that, everything just looked grey.
So I used to go out after the read-through, we'd do a block and I'd go out shopping to get little bits and pieces to add just a bit of colour to the set. And I had to do it in secret because I didn't want to offend Paul. And I think there was one point where I think Paul nearly caught me because I was in the camera room taking out camera cable like this. And all of a sudden Paul came up to me with his pipe and just stepped over. "What are you doing, Donna?" I said, "Oh, nothing, just tidying the cable up because it's a bit messy." "Okay," and he walked off and I couldn't believe it. I was carrying on, throwing it onto the set and walking off.
Thankfully, the production was able to bring in Peter Ragg, a seasoned visual effects artist who had worked on Doctor Who, Captain Scarlet and Thunderbirds. Together with his team, Ragg was able to design and build the large filming model of Red Dwarf itself, affectionately dubbed the Big Red Brick, and created several key flyby sequences. Paul Jackson also hired Ed Bye to direct the series. Though the more experienced crew were apprehensive at working with a first-time director, Bye demonstrated an energy and enthusiasm for the project which helped quell the lingering doubts that such a production was even possible. However, the series was very nearly cancelled before it even began due to a sudden electricians' strike at the BBC. Luckily, Paul Jackson and Peter Ridsdale Scott were able to convince BBC higher-ups that Red Dwarf was worth remounting after the strike was over, and so after the dispute was settled, the series could finally start filming. As was common practice for both dramas and comedies at the BBC at the time, Red Dwarf was to be shot in a studio essentially as live, with entire episodes being filmed usually in the space of one evening or a weekend. Therefore, the cast and crew would rehearse in Acton, London during the week, and then catch a bus up to Manchester to record the episodes. Getting a live studio audience to provide a laugh track for the episodes also proved challenging.
I think it was about 20% full, and I went out of the building and across the road to the pub, begging people to come across, to come in and see this show. And in fact, got half the pub.
But even with the audience Naylor could muster, it was soon apparent the script needed to be funnier.
The parts where Rob and Doug had laughed and Paul Jackson had laughed in the rehearsals, you're expecting laughter. And of course, when it's not howling back, you know, you're beginning to think, I'm doing something wrong. I'm useless.
OK, Modo, spell orbit. I've seen your reports. You cannot spell orbit. O-R-B-I-T.
That is how you spell orbit? You just had to keep mentioning to yourself that this is the first time that anyone's seeing this. And, you know, people aren't going to laugh immediately at it. It'll take a while to sort of bed in.
As filming eventually finished ahead of schedule, this afforded the writers and producers the opportunity to film extra scenes, to beef up the comedy in the episodes and re-edit the first series for a tighter finished product. To create the music for the series, Howard Goodall was brought on board. Goodall had already created the theme tunes for British comedies Blackadder and Mr. Bean.
It seemed to me that what really cried out from the interaction between Lister and Rimmer was the fact they didn't want to be there, they were stuck out in space. And in those days, Lister spent a lot of time going on about wanting to be somewhere nice in the sun. Fiji, I think it was his chosen destination. And that was really where he wanted to be, not stuck in a mining ship. I did write the lyric for that song, yes, although I think I was expecting them to come back and say, well, now here's an improved version, can you do that? But they seemed to like what I'd already done and didn't seem to want to mess around with it at all, so it was left like that.
With considerable pressure from BBC higher-ups and apprehension on the part of the cast and crew, Series 1 of Red Dwarf began on the 15th of February 1988.
This is an SOS distress call from the mining ship Red Dwarf. The crew are dead, killed by a radiation leak. The only survivors were Dave Lister, who was in suspended animation during the disaster, and his pregnant cat, who was safely sealed in the hold. Revived 3 million years later, Lister's only companions are a life form. Oh.
Re-watching Red Dwarf Series 1 can be an odd experience. To pull back the curtain a tad, I was first introduced to Red Dwarf in Series 6, and much of what I caught outside of that was limited to the 3rd, 4th and 5th series. Having first seen the era when the show was much more settled in its style and confident with its identity, the first series of Red Dwarf really illustrates just how long it took the show to find its feet. While a certain stripe of fan views the first 2 series of Red Dwarf with a lot of affection, for me, I've always felt these early episodes are slightly aimless, as though the right tone, aesthetic and style are yet to be found. A lot of the mood of Series 1 is informed by the drab production design, where various hues of grey dominate every set, only broken up by the occasional brightly coloured control panel, Lister's loud Hawaiian shirts, or the cat's sharp suits. However, in some respects, the near monochrome visuals of Series 1 actually helps narrow the focus onto the core relationship between Lister and Rimmer. While its sci-fi tropes put many BBC executives off, others were able to see beyond the spaceships and mutants to the story's central duo, often comparing the show's core idea to Porridge or The Odd Couple, 2 men who hate each other trapped in a prison which doesn't even have guards. And while the chemistry between Charles and Barry is clear from their first scene, in terms of pure acting ability, it can't be denied that Barry is, at first, running rings around his co-star. Barry's background as a skilled impressionist and character actor means the petty, cowardly, career-obsessed, neurotic wannabe Napoleon emerges fully formed right from the get-go. His simultaneously nagging and pompous tone of voice and stiff posture showcases how Barry is truly embodying a character, as opposed to Craig Charles, who is essentially playing himself. That's not to say Craig Charles is awful by any means. In terms of pure comedic delivery, both actors are terrific, and Charles even manages to lend several scenes some real poignancy. But his performance in general isn't really all that believable, and his inexperience as an actor is pretty obvious in the first 6 episodes. Meanwhile, Danny John Jules is electrifying as the cat. His background in dance and stage performance sees him imbue the character with a captivating physical energy, and by throwing considerable gusto behind his high-pitched vocals, every line that comes out of his mouth lands with considerable impact. Almost as the antithesis to John Jules' high-energy performance, Norman Lovett's deadpan delivery and gormless expression as Holly is just as memorable in the exact opposite way. While Doug Naylor and Rob Grant were still finding the show's comedic voice at this point, the chemistry of the actors still results in a steady stream of well-aimed and well-delivered jokes.
What are future echoes?
How simple do you want this?
So Lister can understand it.
Oh dear.
In a way, Series 1 feels like the show stumbling across a wealth of great comedic and character potential while still tripping over into the occasional pothole. One such pothole being the mid-season episode Waiting for God, where the ambition of the underlying concept is clearly out of reach of the writers as well as the production's resources. For a story so focused on the cat, he factors into events in a very minor way, and the idea of Lister actually embodying the cat's god Cloister in form and function just as the elder cat priest dies isn't successfully exploited for either its comedic or dramatic potential. There are other episodes which do hit upon the goldmine the show was sitting on, however, in Future Echoes and in Confidence and Paranoia. The former showcases Grant and Naylor's clear, deep knowledge of science fiction, as they engineer a fascinating and intricate plot for the characters to wrestle with. It's an early example of Red Dwarf having its cake and eating it too, where amusing comedy doesn't come at the expense of genuinely engrossing science fiction. Confidence and Paranoia, meanwhile, definitely balances absurd and hilarious situational comedy with engaging character exploration, as facets of Lister's own personality are rendered real on the ship. It's an episode which is nicely elevated by its 2 guest stars, Craig Ferguson and Lee Corns as the titular Confidence and Paranoia, respectively. However, if there's an episode in Series 1 which can be counted as a true home run, it is the finale Me Squared. After tricking Lister in the previous episode in his attempt to resurrect Kachansky in holographic form, Rimmer moves quarters to live with his own doppelganger, soon being driven mad from having to endure his own repulsive personality. As mentioned previously, not only is Chris Barry excellent from the very first episode, but it is my opinion that the character of Arnold J Rimmer is quite frankly one of the greatest television characters ever created. There is something so deeply sad and pathetic about Rimmer as a character that one's first instinct is to feel sorry for him, but he's also so lacking in every respectable and decent trait, and so quick to be petty, abusive, cruel, and snobbish that it feels truly cathartic when he becomes the punching bag for the other characters. Me Squared is the first example of how far this dichotomy within the character can be mined for hilarious comedy and great drama. Rimmer's initial embrace of his duplicate self as he willfully engages in an endless cycle of preening self-aggrandizement soon gives way to petty differences and annoyances, eventually building to the point where both Rimmers regularly descend into hysterical shouting matches. The absurdity of the situation feels almost like cosmic justice, and Barry's line delivery as he argues with himself never fails to make me double over laughing.
Can you shut up, Rimmer? Some of us are trying to sleep! Obviously, we have professional disagreements. Shut up, you dead git!
Stop your foul whining, you filthy piece of distended rectum!
Rimmer and me, we've had a bit of a tiff. Nothing major, but it goes without saying, it was his fault!
But the true crowning achievement of the episode is its final scene, as Lister finally solves the mystery behind Rimmer's perplexing last words, gazpacho soup, a puzzle he has been preoccupied with for most of the episode. In true Rimmer fashion, his explanation for his dying declaration, recounting a time where he ate at the captain's table, unaware the gazpacho soup he had been served was meant to be cold, is at once heartbreakingly tragic while also being laughably pathetic. Rimmer's monologue is so passionate and sincere, the twist reveal that Lister has already terminated the duplicate Rimmer, and has let the original pour his heart out merely to satisfy his own curiosity, works gangbusters. The way the jokes are woven into an otherwise otherwise straightforward scene is masterfully done. The emotional tension of the scene is maintained so well that Lister's dad joke-esque last line brings the house down.
Let's go for another drink.
Super.
Although the first series of Red Dwarf certainly had teething problems and met with a decidedly mixed critical reception, by the time Series 1 had finished, it did score one major victory in the ratings.
So there I was on the Wednesday morning, down to program review, worrying what I was going to say, how we're going to explain what we're trying to do, what we hope to achieve, all those things. And halfway through the journey I thought, forget this, I'm getting nowhere. And got out the paper. I was reading the Times, and in those days, on the back page of the Times, I got to the back page, the Times printed the ratings, and I'd completely forgotten that they did that. I'd completely forgotten about ratings, really. I looked through BBC One, then I looked at BBC Two, and there it was, Red Dwarf, number 2, 4.75 million. We got the ratings, and we got the audience. And I just went to the buffet and got a brandy and thought, doesn't matter, we've done it.
Thanks to the clear rating success of Red Dwarf, Series 2 was commissioned before Series 1 had even finished airing, something highly unusual for the BBC at the time. Having found more confidence as writers, Grant and Naylor sought to make Series 2 even more ambitious with its sci-fi concepts, and the production team were keen to change the grey colour palette which dominated Series 1. While the same sets were used, efforts were made to redress them to add significantly more colour and a lived-in quality. The main control room was heavily augmented, with far more monitors added which could display intricate computer graphics. There were also opportunities for the lighting crew to add in more colour and atmosphere to several scenes. Ultimately, while the look of the second series was still a far cry from the alien-inspired aesthetic Grant and Naylor had in mind, they were far more satisfied with the production design as a whole. While the production team had made strides, the young cast were still growing accustomed to the professional environment they had found themselves in. Craig Charles and Danny John Jules in particular were known for frequently arriving late to rehearsals and to set, often still hungover from the night before.
I filmed a lot of Red Dwarf with a hangover. Danny can be so annoying when you've got a hangover, because he's up, it's like, yeah, he's talking, and it's like, well, you know what I did last night, God, you know what I mean? And he was out with me. You know, he was out with me, and I'm looking at him going, why are you like this? Why, you know, I feel as though someone just opened up my head and shat in it. I mean, even Chris had a hangover sometimes on it, do you know what I mean? Because we'd all go out, because when we were filming it in Manchester, I mean, bad move. It's a bad move. You take us all from our homes, stick us in a hotel with a free bar. Come on!
Rehearsals were further hampered by conflict between Craig Charles and Chris Barry, the antagonistic relationship between their on-screen characters being reflective of real life.
Which helped the characters in many ways. It came across on screen anyway, it helped it come across on screen, because, you know, on screen we're protagonists, you know, we wind each other up. And in real life, me and Chris we jarred along a lot in this sort of period between 2, 3, 4 and 5, me and Chris really had a very uncomfortable relationship, do you know what I mean? And which comes across on screen, which works for the show. But I feel much better about it now. We have a much closer, more sort of friendly relationship now, and based on sort of mutual respect, I suppose.
Despite continuing teething problems, however, the cast and crew ploughed ahead with Red Dwarf Series 2, pleased with their initial success, which they hoped would continue.
Can you come in any later, Norm? How about speeding that line up a bit? You could get the first act of Ben Hur in there.
I hear not what you say.
Series 2 of Red Dwarf is indeed an improvement over its first. With Series 1 effectively serving as a 6-episode pilot, there's an attempt in Series 2 to retain and refine what worked, while dropping and improving what didn't. Craig Charles is certainly more comfortable as Dave Lister. While Charles's comedic timing is just as sharp as the first series, his dramatic capabilities have expanded greatly. Combined with the improved writing for the character, expanding his backstory, hobbies and interests, the character Dave Lister feels much more three-dimensional this time around. And while the interior look of Red Dwarf itself has certainly improved, it's the scope of Series 2 which feels truly refreshing. Thanks to a surplus in the effects budget and extra money allocated for locations, Series 2 saw the introduction of Blue Midget, which allowed the cast to visit other ships and planets, but it's a trip to virtual reality which is the central focus of our first highlighted episode, Better Than Life. After coming across the letter informing him of his father's death, Rimmer's depression is alleviated when Lister comes across the virtual reality game Better Than Life, which can supposedly make all the player's dreams come true. Better Than Life is a clear illustration of all the ways Series 2 has improved over Series 1. An early scene, much like the finale in Me Squared, perfectly balances genuinely touching drama as Lister and Rimmer contemplate death, loss and all the loved ones they left behind, while still weaving in some solid jokes.
I remember when my dad died, you know. I was only 6. Got loads of presents of everyone like it was Christmas. I remember wishing a couple of more people would die so I could complete my Lego set.
The scenes inside the Better Than Life game itself are somewhat hampered by the realities of production, especially when the script called for a beach in paradise.
The budget really was too small for what we were trying to do, and Rob and I weren't helping anything by writing things like a beach in paradise.
We must have thought we were going to go to Mozambique or something, but no.
Nothing personal against the Welsh, but real beach ain't Barbados.
We will get the special lenses and we'll get, gels on it. It will look really warm and great. Oh, okay. And then, of course, you show up and you think, this is real beach. It's really cold. This isn't going to work.
The guys had to sit there pretending they were enjoying the sun, and it was bitterly cold. I mean, honestly, Danny was turning blue. His teeth were chattering while he was saying, God, this is paradise. Pass me another pina colada. And he had to, in between takes, they had to come up with warm thermo blankets and wrap him up. Cardiac resuscitators. It was terrible.
But like the best of British sci-fi of the era, the lack of production value is made up for due to the quality of the writing and performances of the cast. And there are a number of fun gags throughout the latter half of the episode, like Rimmer meeting Napoleon Bonaparte and Kat dating a mermaid. The brilliance of the writers, however, is showcased in the last third of the episode. Having stumbled across the comedic goldmine of Rimmer's character in Me Squared, we see the Better Than Life game turn into a corrupted nightmare when it is forced to process the deranged psyche of Arnold Judas Rimmer.
My brain's rebelled. It just won't accept nice things happening to me. It just keeps fantasizing the horribleness.
Once again walking that fine line of tragedy and catharsis, the concept that Rimmer's own subconscious mind outright rejects any form of wish fulfillment is a stroke of genius. It's the perfect demonstration that in spite of all his excuses, Rimmer truly is his own worst enemy. Similar themes are also present in the following episode, Thanks for the Memory. Following a raucous celebration of Rimmer's death, the Red Dwarf crew wake up to discover they have lost 2 days, gained 2 broken feet, and they also discover a gravestone bearing the name of Lister's former girlfriend. Thanks for the Memory is a wonderfully innovative episode, a kind of whodunit where our main characters function as detectives, suspects, and culprits all at once as they attempt to piece together what exactly happened following that drunken night. It's surprising that while it still features the usual standard of comedy, it can be experienced almost as a pure drama. The way the complex narrative unfolds is truly gripping, with the explanations of each anomaly of the morning after acting like large puzzle pieces which all slot together by the end. But for me, it's the central relationship between Lister and Rimmer which excels in Thanks for the Memory. For one thing, there's the truly surprising act of Lister actually taking pity on Rimmer and gifting Rimmer his own memories of a past relationship in a genuine attempt at bringing Rimmer some happiness. Therefore, when it goes awry, Rimmer believing his lost love Lisa Yates was actually cheating on him with Lister, and Lister realizing how foolish he was to end things with her in the first place, there's some real emotional heft to the events.
I don't want to feel like this anymore.
So you're in pain, yeah? I know, but remember, if you go through life without feeling, if you go through life never experiencing, you're no better than a jellyfish. You're no better than a bank manager.
There are many more nuggets of gold peppered throughout the rest of Series 2, such as the even more complex narrative of Stasis Leak.
I'm the Rimmer who's with the Lister who married Kachansky. Now from this point on, things get a little bit confusing.
The razor-sharp comedy of Queeg.
Oh yeah, that joins up with the white cable.
The white cable?
Yep. Or is it the yellow cable?
And the high-concept sci-fi of Parallel Universe.
The fifth dimension is coexisting realities. Two bodies who share the same space but are unaware of each other's existence.
Sounds like my parents in bed.
The increase in quality was certainly reflected in both critical reviews and the ratings, with an increase to over 5 million regular viewers, a rarity for any television show. Then again, Red Dwarf was proving to be the consistent exception to many of TV's long-established rules. Having proven its success, another series was soon commissioned, but the third year of the show would see some big changes. For the third series of Red Dwarf, Doug Naylor and Rob Grant were promoted from writers with creative input to full producers, giving them not just input, but almost full creative control over the show. Top of their list of changes they wanted to make was the production design. Doug Naylor had originally wanted to hire Mel Bibby for the job, but was unavailable for the first 2 series. But by the third series, the producer made sure to snag him the moment there was an opening in his schedule. Though there was no increase to the budget, Bibby proved to be incredibly resourceful in creating the alien-inspired look Grant and Naylor had envisioned from the beginning. With an assortment of spray-painted egg cartons, yogurt pots, and backlit plastic pallets, the sets of Red Dwarf were completely transformed from a handful of wooden walls painted military grey to a much more convincing spaceship interior. The art department was also joined by costume designer Howard Burden, who completely redesigned all of the characters' costumes. Burden chose to dispose with Lister's Hawaiian shirts and logo tees in favour of a customised leather jacket, which would become a signature look for the character. Rimmer's uniform took on a retro-futuristic style, highly evocative of Jerry Anderson's Captain Scarlet, and the cat's outfits transformed from an array of sharp suits to a wardrobe full of gaudy runway-ready designs. One of the most endearing additions to Series 3 came from Peter Ragg's visual effects department. Not being satisfied with the cramped and blocky blue midget, Ragg's team were tasked with creating a new supplemental ship at first designated White Midget. As the new design was being refined, many in the effects department nicknamed the ship Starbug. Once Grant and Naylor caught wind of the nickname, they decided to make Starbug the official name of the craft in-universe. As well as a ship change, Series 3 also saw a cast change with the loss of Norman Lovett's Holly. Between series, Lovett had moved from London to Edinburgh to be with his wife, and was also busy with his own show I Love It. This made it difficult for him to attend rehearsals on a regular basis, which ultimately led him to choose to leave Red Dwarf. After casting the net wide in search of a replacement, Hattie Hayridge, who had previously played Holly's alternate reality self Hilly in Series 2's Parallel Universe, was chosen as his replacement. Like many of the Red Dwarf cast, Hayridge had little acting experience, but was a seasoned stand-up comedian who emerged as part of the alternative British comedy scene in the late 80s and early 90s.
I think they auditioned about 10 people that day, I think. Because I can read upside down, so I was reading down their list. And some people were quite proper, well, I'd say proper actors. Whereas I'd just done stand-up.
Another new face joining the cast was Robert Llewellyn as the android Crichton. Crichton originally appeared in the first episode of Series 2, played by David Ross. His debut story is a solid piece of sci-fi comedy fun, with the hapless Crichton shocked to learn that the crew he has been doting on for the past few centuries have in fact been dead for quite some time.
Who's dead?
They are dead. They're all dead.
My God. Well, I was only away 2 minutes.
From there, he is essentially adopted by the Red Dwarf crew and soon exploited by Rimmer, who turns him into the ship's housemaid, while Lister encourages him to break his programming and become his own person, encouragement which ultimately pays off.
I think it's rather good, Miss Ronald, don't you, sir?
The episode was a strong start to the show's second year, with the character Crichton and actor David Ross proving to be highly popular. Therefore, it was always Grant and Naylor's intention to bring Crichton back, once again played by David Ross, and in early talks the actor was excited to join the show as a regular cast member. Unfortunately, by the time Series 3 entered production, David Ross was already hip-deep in a long-running theatrical production at London's Old Vic Theatre, making it impossible for him to reprise the Crichton character. Robert Llewellyn first caught Paul Jackson's eye at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival with his one-man show Mammon Robot Born of Woman, about a robot who behaves increasingly badly the more human he becomes. Jackson soon invited the actor for an audition which won him the part soon after. Llewellyn's screen presence and comedic style was much different to David Ross's, and so Llewellyn spent a great deal of time working with the writers to fashion a new personality for Crichton, trialling a large number of accents and physical quirks.
Boy, oh boy, I've never met a man with so much patience, you know.
I tried all these different walks when we were first talking about it in the rehearsal studio without the costume on, all sorts of silly walks, and actually what defined the walk was the costume. I mean, it was quite restrictive because your shoulders were held really rigid and your legs were held rigid. You eventually just only bloody walkers like that.
They must have gone through every accent in the world in rehearsal with Doug and Rob, you know.
I remember trying to read it in with a French accent. That was very rapidly rejected. A Swedish one, which lasted quite a long time, so which was sort of, I think I'd done a kind of comedy character on stage who spoke a little like this and had the ching-song voice. And, you know, there was, hello, my name is Creighton. You know, it was quite fun.
You know, there's 75 silly walks you can do, you know, and they must have covered them all, you know. And Robert, at the end of it, was still patient. About 3 hours before, I would have stormed through a window and gone and left the planet, probably, you know. But, you know, Robert was sitting there sort of going, right, guys, so let's go back to 35. Voice 35, walk 100. Is that a good combination? Let's try it again anyway. Let's try it for the 73rd time.
I'd spent quite a lot of time in Vancouver in British Columbia in Canada, and I found that accent really intriguing. So originally it was meant to be like that, but as many British Columbians have pointed out, quite vociferous to me in the following years, I don't have anything that resembles a Vancouver accent, but that was where it was my idea of it.
I wanted to get a lot of angular features on the face, keeping it flesh-toned and flesh-looking.
I thought they were making a mould so that they could then make the helmet. I was still sure it was going to be a helmet, but then when I first saw the rubber mask, I went, I see, it does go all over.
Poor Robert, though, you know. In those days, it used to take 3 or 4 hours to put his makeup on. So he'd have to, you know, get up at crack of dawn, 5 o'clock in the morning out.
Llewellyn's addition to the cast couldn't have come at a better time, as the aforementioned tense relationship between Craig Charles and Chris Barry had finally broken by that point. While the details have never been made clear, there are hints of the two actors having a major falling out towards the end of Series 2, which made rehearsing the usual two-hander scenes virtually impossible. Instead, Series 3 becomes more of an ensemble show. While Lister and Rimmer are still the principal characters, gone are the Porridge-esque bunk scenes, replaced by new two-hander scenes between Rimmer and Crichton, Lister and Cat, or group debates in Starbug's cockpit or Red Dwarf's control room. While it may have been under less than ideal circumstances, I feel this change in dynamic greatly improves the series as a whole. While the bunk scenes in the first two series certainly had their charm, the Red Dwarf posse scenes featuring all main cast members bouncing off one another have a terrific momentum. Sharp one-liners, elaborate setups and payoffs, and playful insults effortlessly carry the character development and sci-fi concepts, one facet of the show never coming at the expense of the other. The bristling dialogue is also helped by Red Dwarf's unique vocabulary, which fully crystallizes in Series 3. Goit, Gimboid, and of course the various uses of smeg all contribute to Red Dwarf carving out its unique pop culture identity, in the same vein as Battlestar Galactica's Frack and Felgercarb. The definitive look of Red Dwarf is also fully cemented in Series 3. All of the new contributions to the production design feel instantly iconic. From Lister's leather jacket, Crichton's angular features, and Starbug, the never-bettered embodiment of the old rust bucket which keeps on chugging no matter how much of a beating it takes. This visual revamp is a huge reason Series 3 of Red Dwarf feels so refreshing when watched in order with the preceding two series. Not only is the writing sharper and the cast more confident, but the new look of the show really gives it a sense of fun. The predominantly grey colour palette of Series 1 and 2 certainly helped sell the sense of isolation and loneliness felt by the characters, but it also made the show feel stagey and subdued. Series 3, meanwhile, in better approximating that alien-inspired production design, not only makes the show's universe feel more believable, but the splashes of colour and layers of detail facilitate the various sci-fi shenanigans feeling like a real adventure rather than a British sitcom with sci-fi elements added on top. The premises of the episodes are even more ambitious and creative in Series 3, as evidenced by the first installment, Backwards. After a Star Wars-style title crawl which deliberately scrolls too fast for the viewer to properly read, explaining the visual reboot, casting changes, and resolving the Series 2 cliffhanger, we are thrown into the new series proper with the episode immediately coming out swinging. A bunk scene featuring Kat and Lister discussing the attractiveness of Wilma Flintstone is already funny enough.
Why are we talking about going to bed with Wilma Flintstone? You're right. We're nuts. This is an insane conversation. She'll never leave Fred and we know it.
But the following scene of Crichton's driving test in Starbug is simply hilarious. And that's even before we get to the titular Backwards world. Not only does this concept provide a wealth of great sight gags and wordplay, but it also showcases some truly impressive filmmaking.
So actually preparing for it was quite hard, but shooting for it was really hard, because as a director you have a certain geography in your mind. So if you have a shot, for argument's sake, it starts wide and finishes tight, then logically your next shot should start wide so that the two will cut together. Then this shot, which is going to that shot, now that one's backwards. So that one now starts wide and finishes tight, but because you're running it backwards, it's been shot the other way, but it's got to join onto this shot, which has been run forwards, and so, you know, your brain starts to explode.
Not only is the episode hysterically funny, but it's also a delightfully clever narrative, with seeds planted earlier on paying off in an absolute showstopper of a reverse barroom brawl, packed with enough time-bending stunts to make Christopher Nolan blush.
Where are you going, you coward? I've just worked out what happens to me back.
It's comfortably one of my favourite episodes of the entire show, but it's just the start of Series 3's great offerings. Following the extravaganza of Backwards, Marooned is a suitably more simplistic and character-driven story, which shows Lister and Rimmer marooned on an icy planet with rapidly dwindling supplies. Considering the behind-the-scenes relationship between Craig Charles and Chris Barry at the time, it's frankly remarkable this episode was even possible. It's fortunate their great on-screen chemistry is never diminished, despite the feelings between the actors. Much like Thanks for the Memory, there's an unexpected affection which emerges between Lister and Rimmer here, however brief. It's business as usual at first, as Rimmer's usual personality defects come close to driving Lister round the bend.
Mayday, Mayday. Wonder why they call it Mayday.
Hey?
The distress call. Wonder why it's Mayday. It's only a bank holiday. Ascension Sunday. Ascension Sunday. The 15th Wednesday after Pentecost.
But as the situation grows more desperate, and their conversations wade into more personal, even intimate territory, it's obvious they are more alike than first thought in some unexpected ways. It's clear their lives beforehand were filled with parental issues, heartbreak, and regret. However, this is still Red Dwarf, so the full weight of the tragedy is mitigated slightly by how laughably pathetic they both are. And much like the finale of Me Squared, the sincere emotional tension builds to a stunning payoff. Marooned is another one of my favourite episodes, showcasing the excellent writing for the characters and the actors playing them on top form. Simple in concept, but infinitely rewarding to the viewer. The third episode of the series is the perfect synthesis of high-concept sci-fi and focus on character, which results in a wave of laughs and thrills in Polymorph. A shape-shifting, genetically engineered life form which feeds on human emotion infiltrates Red Dwarf, where it soon wreaks havoc among the crew. A piece of advice often repeated to aspiring writers is, you know you've got great characters when you can place them in any situation and instantly know how they'd react, allowing the plot to essentially write itself. Polymorph is a prime example of this idea. As the creature stalks each crew member and extracts key emotions, the way their established personalities and the larger dynamic is altered has simply uproarious results. Lister, losing his fear, turns into an aggressive, violent lunatic who mistakes a willful disregard for his own life as some kind of heroism. Rimmer, losing his anger, still has all the undeserved pomposity, but without the weasel conniving he uses to exert power over others. Crichton, being robbed of his guilt, turns him into a maniacal, mechanical menace with no verbal filter and a willingness to sacrifice the others to save himself. And after Cat loses his vanity, he's reduced to a drunken hobo, inadvertently revealing just how shallow a creature he really is. But this great character material is merely the thread which weaves together an incredibly fun mini-monster flick. The shapeshifting quirk introduces us to the polymorph with a laugh, but its main form as a towering, armor-plated killing machine is fantastically realised on screen, and the various scenes of the crew battling against it are filled with effective tension and scares. It's an episode which hits the bullseye in being solid science fiction, great comedy, and once again showing us just how strong an ensemble the Red Dwarf cast are. Overall, Series 3 was a triumphant success. Critical and fan reception was better than ever, and it continued to impress in the ratings, hovering around BBC Two's most watched fiction show. It was a vindication of Grant and Naylor's creative vision and a testament to the growing abilities of the production team. Not only did it guarantee a further series, but further creative strides as well.
Where are we? Dunno. Stone. I'm sort of...
Stone. They were going to sort that out in the dub.
For Series 4, Red Dwarf moved from its studio in BBC Manchester to a dedicated space in Shepperton Studios. The move allowed the series to have a permanent standing set at the studios, negating the need to rehearse at Acton and instead prep for recording on the set itself, making for a more efficient and filmic production process. Having proved their worth as producers, Rob Grant and Doug Naylor asserted even more creative control for Series 4 by forming their own company, Grant Naylor Productions. Series 4 of Red Dwarf maintains the high standards set by Series 3, with even more inspired sci-fi concepts, even more iconic gags, and continuously strong character writing. Visually, the show is also much brighter and a little sharper, though this does have the side effect of making the series look a little more stagey and flat in many studio-based scenes. A contrast which is highlighted by the much more atmospheric and cinematic-looking location work. The new and continued strengths of the show are clearly present in Series 4's third episode, Justice. The crew visit a high-tech prison station to find out who is inside a stasis pod they've recently acquired. This goal is soon sidetracked when Rimmer is accused of the murder of the entire Red Dwarf crew due to his own guilt pertaining to the accident. Therefore, Crichton concocts a defense hearing whereby he will prove Rimmer's innocence by illustrating his incompetence. In truth, the episode's plot is a little overstuffed, and while it has a lukewarm status among some fans, for me it's an absolute classic. The framing narrative features Lister suffering from space mumps, a long-running gag where the audience is just waiting for the inevitable, and when it does...
It's the first twin...
God. His head burns.
There is further physical comedy when the crew are escorted inside the prison via self-driving boots, followed by a flurry of fun anecdotes about Lister's numerous past crimes.
Well, it was just one time at this hotel.
Oh, lots of people take towels from hotels, sir.
I took the bed. I went to knock the window to my mate outside.
You mean to say you went to a hotel and stole the bed?
Stole the entire room?
Which is why it's all the funnier when the camera lingers on Rimmer's smug face, the audience having put together what's about to happen to him already. However, it's the trial scene which is truly the highlight of the episode. The entire sequence is essentially the rest of the characters continuously one-upping each other in insulting Rimmer.
Would you describe the accused as a friend?
Take the fifth.
Now, please answer the question. And are there no others who've shared moments of intimacy with him?
Only one, but she's got a puncture.
But it's Robert Llewellyn who has simply fantastic dialogue to sink his teeth into as Crichton breaks down the depth of Rimmer's character.
This man is not guilty of manslaughter. He is only guilty of being Arnold J Rimmer. That is his crime. It is also his punishment.
The episode is then capped off by a face-off with a deranged killing machine, revealed to be the occupant of the pod they came to the prison to investigate in the first place. Though thanks to the wonderfully inventive idea of the justice field, this deadly contest is transformed into a Looney Tunes-esque masterpiece of physical comedy.
I got him, buddy! Leave this to me! No! No! Better late than never!
Like many great episodes of Red Dwarf, Rimmer is also the subject of our next highlighted episode, Dimension Jump, which introduces fan favourite Ace Rimmer. As Doug Naylor put it, it seemed at the time Chris Barry was suffering from git overload, and thus Ace Rimmer, the alternate reality version of Rimmer who became a Space Corps test pilot, makes his debut in the episode as he dimension jumps into the main Red Dwarf universe and runs into his far more pathetic self. Chris Barry's performance as Rimmer is so strong from the start of the show, it's easy to forget what a great character actor he is as well, his previous repartee as the Man of 1,000 Voices being eclipsed by his most famous character. Although now and again Barry was given the opportunity to use his talents for impersonation, his performance as Ace Rimmer is easily the most impressive display of his range. Donning a ridiculous space-age bomber jacket and volumetric hairstyle, Barry is surprisingly convincing as a badass swashbuckling space adventurer, even while Grant and Naylor are clearly having fun parodying the archetype.
See you later, Ace. What a guy.
However, in my humble opinion, outside of Ace Rimmer himself, the episode Dimension Jump is pretty standard fare for Red Dwarf by this point. While featuring the usual standard of character-driven comedy, in my view the best use of Ace Rimmer as a character came much later in the show. Instead, I'd like to highlight what I believe is a tremendously underrated episode of Red Dwarf, the series finale Meltdown. After discovering a teleportation device in Red Dwarf's science lab, the crew journey to a planet which used to house an elaborate wax museum of famous historical figures. However, after millions of years alone, the wax droids have become sentient and fallen into a brutal war of good versus evil. And into this conflict comes Arnold Rimmer, who thinks he has the means to finally bring victory. To reiterate that piece of writing advice from earlier, a scenario where the Red Dwarf crew bump into a bunch of famous historical and pop culture icons basically writes itself. But the comedy gold is on display right from the start, as Lister and Kat are forced to suffer through an interminable anecdote about a game of Risk from Rimmer.
A 6 and a 3, and he came back with a 3 and a 2.
Rimmer, can't you tell the story is not gripping me? I am in a state of non-gripness. I am completely smegging, ungripped. Shut the smeg up!
Once the action moves to the wax world itself, the fun just keeps coming, helped massively by the legitimately talented group of impressionists hired for the episode. The clear standout scene for me though is Lister and Kat's encounter with Emperor Caligula, played by honorary Red Dwarf Ensemble member Tony Hawks.
Hey buddy, we just, Silence, scum! Rasputin, bring hither the skin-diving suit with the bottom cut out, and unleash the rampant wildebeest. You are an impudent fool. You think I'm insane?
Should we take a quick vote?
Silence, scum!
Shut up!
All of this culminates in a wonderfully absurd finale featuring Mahatma Gandhi and Santa Claus being splattered by landmines. The events are all so delightfully silly that it's even more surprising when Lister espouses quite a poignant anti-war sentiment in the aftermath.
Yeah, Rimmer, right, absolutely. Now all the corpses that litter that battlefield can just lie there, safe in the knowledge that they snuffed it under a flag of peace and can now happily decompose in a land of freedom. You smeghead.
Meltdown really is Red Dwarf swinging for the fences, and frankly, I'm quite baffled it isn't regarded as a classic episode by more fans.
According to her notes, this is the viral strain Felicitas populi, commonly known as luck.
What? Luck is a virus?
A positive virus which most human beings contract or something like that, and we wibbly wobbly oobly hoobly hoo. Bibbly bobbly boo.
Well, you haven't got it then, have you?
By Series 5, director Ed Bye had to step away from the show due to his commitment to the detectives. Based on a recommendation from Paul Jackson, Juliet May was hired in Bye's place to direct Series 5. However, as production began on the 5th season, difficulties arose with May's helming of several episodes. This is not to slight Juliet May as a director, and no one has expressed any ill will to any of the parties involved since. Red Dwarf, however, proved to be an extremely difficult series for the then 26-year-old director at the time. May admittedly had little to no knowledge of Red Dwarf or the science fiction genre before she joined the show, and Red Dwarf, with its numerous visual effects, was extremely technically demanding, a problem which was intensified by Grant and Naylor's push for an even more complex and filmic series. May was also not helped by being an outsider to the now very close-knit cast and crew of Red Dwarf, who had an especially close bond with Ed Bye. Eventually it became clear halfway through filming the series that Juliet May was not the right choice for director, and so she chose to leave the series.
I think we all felt a bit guilty that maybe it was a bit of our fault we hadn't given her the support that she needed, and probably we hadn't, do you know what I mean?
If I came to those scripts again now, I would find them much easier to tackle. But I learnt a lot on Red Dwarf, and funnily enough, I've taken what I've learnt on Red Dwarf onto other things, which are not nearly so sci-fi intensive, and it's been terribly useful.
In her place, Rob Grant and Doug Naylor took over as co-directors themselves.
Well, as soon as I heard that Rob and Doug were going to take over, I thought, now this will be exciting. And it was.
Rob was great sometimes with the confidence of ignorance. It'll be fine, we can do it, and that was always my concern, because Rob usually wasn't on the director's shoulder, he was somewhere else. And so I had real concerns of, oh my God, are we biting off more than we can chew?
We didn't really, there was no change, really. It was sort of they did very well.
True to Grant and Naylor's vision for Series 5, Red Dwarf's 5th year is certainly visually impressive. Even Juliet May, despite her difficulties, managed to create some striking-looking episodes. Many episodes almost resemble early Ridley Scott, with the heavy use of soft focus, deep shadows, thick haze, and bold coloured lighting. It throws off the flat studio sitcom look which sometimes plagued Series 4. Series 5 also continues the hot streak started by Series 3 with another set of high-concept episodes and a cast consistently knocking it out of the park in some of the best extended gags in the entire show.
So what's the problem? Hey, you okay? You look tense.
While the inaugural episode Holoship, with its Casablanca-inspired themes and terrific guest performance from Jane Horrocks, is a strong opener, for me the following episode, The Inquisitor, is the true pinnacle of Series 5. The titular Inquisitor is a legendary android who survives to the very end of the universe and determines the only purpose of existence is to live a worthwhile life. Thus, he travels back in time assessing every creature that ever lived to decide whether they are worthy of life. If not, they are erased from existence and replaced with another version of themselves. Which means naturally when this cosmic figure runs into the Red Dwarf crew, the odds are stacked against them to say the least. Put simply, what I love about this episode is the premise on its own. The idea behind the Inquisitor feels like something out of anthologies like Heavy Metal, embodied by haunting imagery which wouldn't look out of place in a Boris Vallejo painting. The premise could so easily make for such a brilliant straight-laced sci-fi horror movie that it almost feels wasted in a sitcom. I say almost because the Red Dwarf crew are obviously the perfect characters to encounter the Inquisitor. The scene in which the ancient mechanoid judges the characters one by one is once again incredibly funny.
Justify yourself.
Well, first,
Liar!
And deeply intriguing.
But I am not human, and neither are you, and it is not our place to judge them. I wonder why you do.
Following this, the plot charges ahead in a dark nightmare where Lister and Crichton find themselves trapped in a reality where they never existed. With the Inquisitor hot on their heels, the duo hatch a fiendishly clever plan using multiple time paradoxes to trick the Inquisitor into destroying himself and restoring reality to its previous state. Incredible potential for a sci-fi horror movie, but interlaced with Red Dwarf's signature sense of humour, I wouldn't have it any other way. Series 5 is honestly stacked with great Red Dwarf outings, but even the season finale finishes things off on a high in Back to Reality. When Starbug is attacked by a gigantic mutant squid, the ship seemingly crashes and explodes, killing everyone on board. The shock of their sudden deaths is quickly overridden, however, when all 4 of them wake up in unfamiliar bodies, discovering they were in fact playing a virtual reality video game the entire time called Red Dwarf. Here the audience is taken along for the ride with the characters as they discover more about their supposedly true identities. Crichton, the glorified housemaid playing science officer, is emboldened when he discovers he's a police officer with the comically macho-sounding name Jake Bullet. Kat is the buck-toothed Jerry Lewis-inspired Dwayne Dibley.
No, please, no. I don't want to be Dwayne Dibley.
Rimmer is Billy Doyle, an even bigger failure than Arnold Rimmer was, outshone by his more successful half-brother, Lister's Sebastian Doyle, head of the secret police in a fascist dystopia. All of these twists and turns to the characters not only provide for great jokes, but also fold neatly into the plot when it's revealed that this is all a collective hallucination induced by the ink of the mutant squid which attacked them.
I'm not Dwayne Dibley.
I am Rimmer.
I'm afraid so.
By the end of its 5th year, Red Dwarf had risen far above cult status, becoming the most watched fiction series on BBC Two, with viewing figures reaching well over 7 million. It was an astounding success for a show which many at the time assumed could only ever be an expensive failure, enjoyed by a small niche of science fiction nerds. But not only was it a smash hit in the ratings, its characters and iconography had become pop culture staples. It even found success in other mediums with a number of spin-off novels and a brief but popular magazine featuring a comic strip in continuity with the series. Against all the odds, Red Dwarf had become a bona fide multimedia franchise, and it wasn't long before the whirlwind of Starbugs and Smegheads caught the attention of Hollywood. Like Doctor Who and Blake 7 before it, Red Dwarf had found its way to the United States via PBS, where it found a small but loyal American audience. The strong ratings for the show on both sides of the Atlantic, and the strong sales of other Red Dwarf spin-off media, soon caught the attention of Universal Studios and NBC, who then approached Grant Naylor Productions about a possible American remake of the series. At the time, Red Dwarf was just wrapping up its 5th year, and there was a real possibility it could have been its last. While the franchise had been a huge success, Rob Grant increasingly began to feel himself and Doug Naylor should leave on a high. 5 series and 30 episodes was more than healthy for a British sitcom at the time, and in some ways the Series 5 finale, Back to Reality, does feel like it could function as the end of the show. Therefore, handing over the reins of Red Dwarf to a new team of American writers and producers for a new version of the series must have felt like the perfect opportunity to move on to something new. Doug Naylor, on the other hand, had the opposing view, that they should carry on with Red Dwarf, even entertaining the possibility of a feature film version. Therefore, in Naylor's mind, getting a foothold in Hollywood with an American Red Dwarf would have been an extremely wise move. Despite their differing views on Red Dwarf's future, Grant and Naylor chose to move forward with an American Red Dwarf pilot. Unbeknownst to them, however, the US producers had already pursued Robert Llewellyn to reprise his role as Crichton.
The American producers had expressed an interest in taking me, and I've never, still to this day, been quite sure why. I don't think it's because they thought I was really an American and they wouldn't have to get me a work permit and a visa. Because you'd think that once they realised they had to, they'd think, let's get someone else, you know. But they did. I mean, and it was a huge hassle for them to get that. It wasn't easy to wangle it. When you're offered a job like that, you get given a 6-year contract. which ties you into this show for 6 years, just in case it runs, and then they've got you, and you can't sort of go, I don't want to do it now. And I'm very much a don't want to do it now sort of person. So I was rather nervous about this monstrous contract. And I didn't want to live in Hollywood, and I didn't want to it would have been 32 episodes of Red Dwarf a year for 6 years. I sort of thought I could see myself at the end of that, either with a staggeringly complex chemical abuse habit or 8 personal psychotherapists.
Joining Llewellyn was Craig Bierko as Dave Lister. Bierko was a graduate of Northwestern University, having studied acting alongside David Schwimmer and Stephen Colbert. While he had landed a number of regular and recurring roles on television before Red Dwarf, he found success on the big screen from the mid-90s onwards, appearing in The Long Kiss Goodnight, Cinderella Man, and Scary Movie 4. He still makes regular appearances on American TV and in theatre to this day. Playing Rimmer was another Chris Eigman. Eigman had previously starred in the movie Metropolitan, but like Bierko, his career really took off in the late 90s. He landed several recurring roles in a number of sitcoms and dramas, such as Gilmore Girls and Malcolm in the Middle, and he continues to have a successful career today. Playing Holly was another British actress, Jane Leaves. In the UK, Leaves had been a regular on the Benny Hill show, and her skills as a dancer found her work in the US in various music videos. She eventually found acting work on sitcoms like Throb and Seinfeld, but found her greatest success as Daphne in the long-running sitcom Frasier.
When Rob came back, I went to his, he had I think it was a launch party or a birthday party, and I attended. And so I sort of walked in and went, who played the cat? And he went, a guy called Hinton Battle. And I went, who? Hinton Battle?
Hinton Battle, like Danny John Jules, got his start as a dancer, finding regular work on and off Broadway. His theatre work was met with widespread acclaim, with Battle receiving numerous accolades, and he eventually moved into directing and choreography work, notably on Evil Dead the Musical.
This guy was like a hero to us dancers and that over here, This guy played the Scarecrow in The Wiz when he was 16 on Broadway, He'd got 3 Tony Awards, this guy was the man.
He also found steady work on television, appearing in Quantum Leap, Dreamgirls, and Touched by an Angel.
Robert actually told me the story. He said he was sitting there one day with Hinton and he's like looking a little bit down. And Robert goes to him, you all right? And he goes, yeah, it's just, how's it going kind of thing. And he's, oh, okay, it's just that the other guy was so good. And I'm like, man, doesn't matter. Now, Hinton Battle has given me the green light.
Work was already well underway on Red Dwarf USA by the time Grant and Naylor flew out to the States. Exhausted by the demanding production of Series 5 and severely jet-lagged, they soon found some serious problems with the script.
So it was based on the original opening script of Red Dwarf, but with changes introducing Crichton right at the beginning. But the same basic idea of the cat being taken on board the ship, blah, blah, blah.
We did the table reading. We then joined, they had a load of guys from The Simpsons and some guys from Cheers came in, so there was a group of like 10 guys all in one room, chipping in one-liners. We were pretty tired, and our nickname became The Wave, which was an abbreviation for the wave of negativity. Because we wouldn't just be chipping in one-liners like everyone else. We'd be asking really fundamental questions. And they were going, basically, oh, you're being so negative, just think of one-liners. And we went, doesn't matter how many one-liners you think of, that's not going to solve it. That's just Band-Aid over the cancer. You need to sort out some real fundamental problems.
And it was only after we'd done a couple of read-throughs with lots of men in suits doing really quite poor fake laughing. Da-da-da. Well, sir, da-da. Doing that, and I'd sort of look at them, and the rest of and I was worried that I was the weird one. But then I look at the rest of the cast, and they're all going, "These people are sick." There was a sort of discussion amongst, not inspired by me at all, but I think a couple of the other cast members sort of gathered round and going, "Right, come here. What do you think of this script?" And I was sort of being all, "Oh, I think it's very good." And they went, "It's shit, shit." And they hated it. They all hated it. So I went, "Oh dear."
While Grant and Naylor were determined to make this new version work, going to the effort of penning their own rewrite.
And then they slipped the script under our doors early that morning. And one by one, the cast members came in, because they kind of turned to me as being the person who knew the poor saps, as if I knew anything. God, say, Robert, what do we do? This script's much better. And I went, well, should we see if we can do that one then? Because it was just instantly transformed.
It seems Hollywood studio politics meant much of their work was done in vain.
And then from that point on, various things happened to prevent the new script being shot. The whole opening few scenes, which addressed a lot of the major problems that were wrong with the American pilot, weren't shot for various reasons that didn't really make sense at the time. And so what we wound up with was something much closer to the original script than the one that we did, although at that point it looked like we'd triumphed, but it was not to be.
Fandom being what it is means various low-quality bootlegs of the unreleased pilot have been making their way around the convention circuit and the internet for some years now. For this video, I decided to seek out one of these copies myself to give the pilot a fair review of my own. Many passionate Red Dwarf fans usually dismiss the American pilot as an irredeemable failure which completely misses the point of the original. Considering the vitriol thrown its way, the American pilot wasn't as bad as I had expected. There are some rather large caveats which have to be taken on board for anyone curious enough to watch it, however. First and foremost, it's unclear whether this pilot was ever meant to be released to begin with, and even pilots which do air are often only a sample of what an eventual show would look like. So I think it's disingenuous to make out that this single episode provides us with a clear picture of what an American Red Dwarf would have been. And truth be told, I actually think there is some good here. While many fans often highlight Craig Bierko as being totally wrong for Dave Lister, I can't say I fully agree. Bierko certainly isn't Craig Charles, but he still has a lot of natural charisma and solid comedic chops. The same goes for Jane Leeves as Holly, and obviously Robert Llewellyn reprising his role as Crichton. In fact, I think the strongest aspect of the pilot is retooling the show so Crichton is there from the beginning. Llewellyn and Bierko have some good chemistry, and if this relationship was made the centre of a full series, I really think it could have worked.
You've been stuck here for 3 million years? What have you been doing?
Well, I've been reading that fire exit sign over there. It's given me a lot of solace over the years.
Chris Eichmann is comfortably the weakest cast member, though. Eichmann certainly had big boots to fill, but I feel like nobody on this production, writer, director, or actor, really got Arnold Rimmer as a character. Rimmer's greatest weakness was always his ego. He's a man who has a hugely inflated perception of himself, believing he is somehow owed all the things he desires. Therefore, it's everyone else's fault that he's such a failure. The US version of Rimmer, however, simply comes across as a slimy, whinging moron, and doesn't leave much of an impression on the viewer. Hinton Battle comes off a little better as Cat, but he isn't helped by most of his dialogue being copied verbatim from the original. That's an issue which affects the pilot in general. Whenever familiar lines and jokes crop up, it just doesn't feel right. The word smeghead was essentially designed to be delivered with British accents, and feels forced and awkward coming out of Bierko. For my money, the biggest weakness of the pilot is the Lister-Kachansky relationship.
I can change, you know. Hey, whatever.
No, that's the problem. Hey, you know, whatever. Everything with you is up in the air. You spend your whole life just drifting and avoiding responsibility. I can't be in a relationship like that.
Wait a minute. I think I know what kind of commitment you're talking about here. You want me to make you my official girlfriend. My God, Chris, you know something? I think I'm ready to take that leap.
Bye, Dave. Don't call.
It speaks to how formulaic some areas of American TV are, that this relationship is seemingly meant to be the typical will they won't they, and it falls completely flat. Ultimately, I don't think the idea of an American Red Dwarf was doomed from the start. As Doug Naylor has said many times, there was a way to tailor the concept to fit an American cast and appeal to an American audience while still retaining the core concept. The US version of The Office is an obvious example of how an American remake of a British sitcom can actually work. And I think there was potential for the same thing to happen with Red Dwarf had Grant and Naylor been given more creative input. Unfortunately, the first pilot failed to impress NBC executives. Even so, Grant and Naylor tried to take one last stab at it with the second pilot. Chris Barry and Danny John Jules were approached this time to reprise their roles. Barry turned it down on the advice of his agent, and John Jules was unavailable. Thus, for the second pilot, Chris Eichman was replaced by Anthony Fusco, and the cat was reimagined as a female character played by Terry Farrell, known to Star Trek fans as Jadzia Dax from Deep Space Nine. The second pilot was less a full episode and more a promotional video due to the extremely low budget Grant and Naylor were given. As a series of loosely connected sketches, I think it's fine.
We are going to get this rust bucket back to Earth, and when we do... What are you doing? I'm recording a distress call to send off into space.
Well, I don't think you're recording. Look, the red light's on.
No. Red means record.
Nuh-uh. Green means record.
Are you sure? Because I don't want to mess this up. It's the last message capsule we have.
Trust me and press the green button and say your message over again.
All right. Hey, that was really great. Now they'll know exactly where to find us.
Yep. Now they have all the information they need.
It's readily apparent Grant and Naylor have a far better grasp of how to adapt the original material to fit a new cast. I also think Terry Farrell as the cat is pretty good in the small glimpse we're given. In a way, her performance and characterization echoes the roguish elements which would later make her so successful in Deep Space Nine.
Maybe someday I'll find the 8 or 9 guys who are right for me, and then my rambling days will be over.
8 or 9?
That is something else I will never understand. How does a human woman get by with just one man a night? One man! I mean, that's not even enough to get your sweat pores open.
As with the first pilot, the second also failed to win over the executives at NBC, and so an American version of Red Dwarf never got the green light, which many fans believe was for the best.
And in America, they give you a lot of food on a big table. It goes on forever. And it's called craft services, and there's lots of men who come and replenish your Danish pastries and your nuts and your Coke. And you just spend all day eating. And then they say, would you mind coming to say a line? And you say, well, I'll just finish this croissant. And I'll just maybe take a shower, and then I'll talk to one of my many agents. And then I'll wander over in my limousine to the studio and say one line, and then I'll go home. And for that, I'm paid $43,000. Yes, I enjoyed it.
Returning to the UK, Grant and Naylor got to work on Series 6, and much like Series 3, it meant some big changes. First and foremost was the loss of Red Dwarf itself. Throughout Series 5, the sets had been so thoroughly damaged and redressed, and the filming model literally blown up for the episode Angels and Demons, that it would cost extra for the production to rebuild everything. Instead, Grant and Naylor envisioned a new status quo, where the characters have lost track of Red Dwarf and are instead confined to Starbug. Starbug itself was greatly expanded with a larger aft section, crew quarters, and engineering deck, all slapped together from the spare parts which could be recovered from the Red Dwarf sets. This did mean a change to the cast, however, with the loss of Hattie Hayridge as Holly. Since Series 3, the role of Holly as a character was greatly reduced following the introduction of Crichton, who could provide much of the exposition and technobabble Holly often did before. Holly instead became a regular dispenser of one-liners, injected into each scene for an extra laugh, but beyond that, Hattie Hayridge wasn't given a tremendous amount to do. Series 4's White Hole is probably the most Holly-focused episode since Norman Lovett's departure, and even then Holly is offline for much of the runtime. While it was a shame to lose Hayridge, as for me at least I actually felt she was more iconic in the role than Lovett, there simply wasn't room for the character in Series 6. To direct the series, initially Grant and Naylor wanted to take on the job themselves, as they had experience directing the latter half of Series 5. However, as the pressure to deliver scripts for the series mounted, they instead hired Anthony Diamanoy. Although the cast had developed a close bond with Ed Bye, Diamanoy ingratiated himself with the cast and crew quite effortlessly, and managed to handle the complex filmmaking with a deft hand.
No matter how wrong it went, which it did, he somehow didn't go, oh, how do I sort this out? He went, right! You know, it was like almost that was a good thing when it went wrong, because then he could sort it out. So he had enormous enthusiasm. So he kept us going when we were flagging really, really well. He was very focused and very clear about what we were doing.
For me, Series 6 is hands down the best series in all of Red Dwarf. Despite the sizable status quo change, it feels like the show distilled down to its best elements. Perhaps after all the headache of trying and failing to launch the US remake, Grant and Naylor were able to refocus on the essence of what made Red Dwarf great in the first place. The visual effects work in Series 6 is some of the best in the whole show, especially the miniatures. Under Peter Ragg, the miniatures and other practical effects always looked good, but it's the breadth of work seen in Series 6 which is so impressive. Barely an episode goes by without a gluttony of new ships, worlds, or Starbug crash scene. But as always, it's the writing and the cast which are on top form. Basically every single joke here lands. The timing feels razor sharp, the one-liners witty, and the extended gags absolutely hilarious.
Damn you both, all the way to Hades. I want to go to Blow Alert.
Okay.
Thank you. Bit of professionalism.
Wait, I've got something. I'm punching it up.
Step up to Red Alert.
Sir, are you absolutely sure? It does mean changing the bulb. Poor devil must have scrawled it in his death throes using a combination of his own blood and even his own intestines.
Who would do that? Someone who badly needed a pen. All in all, 100% successful trip.
Sir, we lost Mr. Rimmer.
All in all, 100% successful trip. Why don't we scrape away this mortar here, slide one of these bricks out, rig up a kind of pulley system, so that when a guard comes in, instead of a tripwire, gets laid out, and we put Rimmer in the guard's uniform, he leads us out, we steal some swords, and fight our way back to the bug.
Or we could use the teleporter.
The new format for Series 6 is certainly a big factor in why the writing feels so elevated. By stripping the characters of Red Dwarf itself and having them confined to Starbug, Lister, Crichton, Cat, and Rimmer are even bigger underdogs, but a lot more active in each plot. Because of the overarching mission to catch up to Red Dwarf, the characters are always running into trouble rather than trouble finding them. They're essentially stripped of all their previous protection. Supplies are always low, every delay is costly, and the ship is barely holding it together as it is. Starbug itself is further cemented as the delightfully charming little ship that could, and ends up feeling much more like a home than Red Dwarf ever did. Overall, these elements make Series 6 feel incredibly exciting and fast-paced. Fascinating sci-fi concepts, hysterical comedy, and thrilling action. It all comes at the viewer so fast, with such underlying high stakes, that each episode almost feels like a mini-movie in and of itself. This is especially true of the series' first episode, Psirens, when the crew encounter mutant creatures which can beam detailed hallucinations into their victims' minds, and then feast on their brains. In some ways, the episode feels like an attempt to one-up Series 3's Polymorph. The telepathic abilities of the Psirens gives Grant and Naylor a license to come up with a slew of absurd scenarios and fun characters for the Red Dwarf crew to encounter. The Psirens themselves are brilliantly realised on screen. Their jet black eyes and subtle sound design make them genuinely creepy and a tangible threat, as in any scene one could be hiding just around the corner. But because this is Red Dwarf, the abilities of the Psirens are expertly mined for their full comedic potential. Lister's romantic encounter with a teenage crush soon turns into a raucous display of gross-out humour when his kiss with the Siren is revealed, replete with swirling camera move. Followed by a tense standoff aboard Starbug as Crichton, Cat, and Rimmer attempt to expose the Siren posing as Lister, and finally capped off with the ridiculous scene of Crichton being crushed into a garbage cube before saving the day.
I'm almost annoyed.
While Polymorph is a fan-favourite episode for good reason and a clear standout from Series 3, in my opinion it's comfortably topped by Psirens, yet this is simply the new standard for Series 6. Following Psirens is Legion. The Red Dwarf crew board an abandoned space station and encounter Legion, an esoteric being who mysteriously knows every detail about them and threatens to trap them in a luxury prison where their every desire is attended to. Although by this point the Red Dwarf crew have had their fair share of outer space adventures and come out intact on the other side, Legion as an episode throws their status as hapless bottom feeders into sharp relief once again. Their attempts at impressing Legion during a banquet brilliantly lampoons each of them one by one. Rimmer's snobbery.
Now, this three-dimensional sculpture in particular is quite exquisite. Its simplicity, its bold, stark lines. Pray, what do you call it?
The light switch.
I couldn't buy it then.
Not really.
I needed to turn the lights on and off.
Lister's uncouth bumbling, and the cat's idiocy.
How'd you land the damn stuff?
Simply invert the ionic phase in the down pulse of the field margin.
I was with you all the way up to simply.
Which is why it's all the more intriguing when it's revealed Legion is in fact a gestalt entity, a composite of all their personalities. The implications of this, that as a group, despite their many failings, they are indeed capable of some extraordinary achievements, is something which I honestly wish the episode explored a bit more. However, the excellent physical comedy is more than enough to satisfy, as Crichton realizes that to escape, he must violently knock out all of his crewmates.
This is not working. I'm a hard light hologram and as such unknockoutable.
I think you're right, sir.
Crichton!
Sorry, sir, I just thought if I took you unawares.
Crichton!
Repeating that bit of writing wisdom I mentioned in part 1, Legion is a prime example of setting up an ensemble of great characters and simply letting them go, leading to fantastic results. While Psirens and Legion are both excellent outings, the clear crowning achievement of Series 6 is Gunmen of the Apocalypse. After tussling with some rogue simulants, Starbug and Crichton are infected with a deadly computer virus, which the crew hope to defeat inside a Western-themed virtual reality game. It's difficult to know where to begin with this one. There are only so many times I can praise the creativity of an episode's premise, the high quality of the comedy, or exploration of the characters without sounding like a broken record. Therefore, I instead want to praise the filmmaking on display in the episode. For many Red Dwarf fans, part of the show's charm is its obvious low budget. There's a sense of backyard filmmaking with the show, as sets and costumes have clearly been stitched together with odd bits of plastic and rubber, and the miniature effects, however strong, still have that old-fashioned Thunderbirds look as opposed to the glossier motion-controlled camera techniques invented for Star Wars. And while I agree this charm does exist, I also think there's some slight dissonance in viewing Red Dwarf this way. While these days it's certainly possible for independent YouTube-based filmmakers to create something rivaling Red Dwarf's production value, I think it's always worth remembering that Red Dwarf was being made on a similar budget to Only Fools and Horses. This was a show which only cost £1.5 million per season, which is why I think Gunmen of the Apocalypse is such a terrific display of the resourcefulness of the show's production team. Continuing to push the envelope, Grant and Naylor writing an episode which called for a western town must have been incredibly daunting to the producers. The likelihood of finding anything usable on their tight budget was thought to be impossible, which is why stumbling upon Laredo, at the time a tourist attraction / LARPing center, was such a great find. And despite having only one day to shoot all of the western-based scenes for the episode, the results are genuinely convincing on screen.
Janet Street Porter was then the BBC liaison person on the series. And I don't quite understand what the BBC liaison person did, because he never really came down and didn't really partake or were really involved in the show. And she said, I've just read this, I'll cut out all the swearing, I've just read this Gunmen's script. It's absolutely stupid, it's totally impossible to shoot, and tell those guys they've got to bin this and start a whole new show. And Charles was able to say, sorry, I'm not able to do that because we shot it yesterday. Which still is one of his favourite stories.
But the great production value of the episode doesn't begin and end there. For the opening scene in a noir game, all the production had to work with was a wall at the back of the studio. Yet with a few rubber bollards, some boxes filled with water, and the only real expense of hiring a vintage car, the space convincingly becomes a Chicago dock. And with a few food products and polystyrene, the visual effects team are able to create a fantastic looking lava planet for Starbug to crash into at the end. The production value is so high that the episode is able to generate laughs by contrast with Lister's very silly way of deceiving the simulants.
Incoming. I am Tarka Doll, an ambassador of the great Vendelian Empire.
During the western scenes themselves, it's clear the cast are having an absolute blast, sending up the various familiar tropes of the genre. And in true Red Dwarf fashion, the expected climactic shootout is transformed into utter hilarity when the crew lose the special skills of their in-game characters, and are forced to confront the deadly Apocalypse gang as their inept selves.
Ah, Mr. Water, it would appear that due to circumstances completely beyond my control, there's been a bit of a cock-up in the bravado department.
To finish things off by breaking the record once again, Gunmen of the Apocalypse is yet another delightfully creative, belly-achingly funny episode propelled by an excellent cast. The episode was extremely well received in the UK and further recognised in the United States when it earned Red Dwarf's first Emmy win.
Rob went with Robert, and I said to Robert, if we win, you must phone me. I'll have my mobile by my bed, it doesn't matter what time, phone me. And he goes, absolutely, of course I will. I woke up in the morning, no message, nothing. I just thought, oh well. So I thought, I wonder who has won. So I turned on the TV, went to teletext, and there it was, we'd won. And that's how I found out. It was so extraordinary, and Robert got invited to some showbiz party and forgot or something. Bastard.
Pulling back the curtain once again, I actually considered highlighting every single episode of Series 6 for this video. However, for the sake of expediency and my own sanity, I think we'll leave things on a high with Gunmen of the Apocalypse. However, the rest of Series 6 is a complete triumph. Emo Hawk Polymorph 2 sees the crew meet the Gelf for an unexpected wedding, before reintroducing the Polymorph. This time, however, its emotion-draining powers have been altered slightly, changing not only its victim's psyche, but physical appearance too, a change which is merely an excuse for the crowd-pleasing returns of Dwayne Dibley and Ace Rimmer.
I'm afraid this means death for both of us. That's a small price to pay to save our chummies, eh?
What a guy.
Then in Rimmer World, all the greatness of Series 2's Me Squared is increased literally tenfold when Rimmer becomes trapped in a nightmare world populated by his own demented clones.
Can you imagine a society composed entirely of me?
I'm trying not to. The last time I did that, it took me a week to dry the mattress.
And finally we have Out of Time, where the crew recovering a time machine soon leads to an encounter with their morally bankrupt future selves.
We travel back and forth throughout the whole of history, and naturally we want to sample the best of everything. It's just a bit unfortunate that the finest things tend to be in the possession of people who are judged to be a bit dodgy.
Hermann Goering is a bit dodgy? What has become of you all?
In reality, the script for the episode was only completed at the very last minute, necessitating the actors literally reading their lines off auto cues hidden throughout the set.
There was one sequence I still remember very clearly where we'd done a bit and there was a big laugh and it was working and we go, and we're all really nervous going, can you make it go up a bit so you can see the next bit so you know what's coming? And then I looked at my screen and the words of a speech I was doing suddenly disappeared. And they disappear in a really odd way on auto cue. They go like that. And then new words appearing. And then I looked over and I could see Doug on the auto cue. He wrote the script on the auto cue with Rob there going, yeah, no, but no. And then they went, right, and action. Well, sir, it looks like the dynamic of this...
Really, when I watch the show, I cannot see anyone reading an auto cue. I think it was a genius way out, and that's what you need when you're in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it. I think you can see it. And we were all saying, I don't think you could tell. You know, you couldn't tell that I was going like that all the way through the scene. You know, I'm talking to Chris here and I'm actually looking over there, you know.
Knowing how rushed the final project was is a testament to Grant and Naylor's talents as writers. In spite of the tight schedule, they engineer yet more clever sci-fi concepts and absurd comedy, when Starbug wanders into a minefield of unreality pockets.
All we gotta do is keep our heads.
The pockets are getting denser and closer together. We're never going to make it.
While there are plenty of laughs throughout, the final act is packed with compelling drama as the Red Dwarf crew are confronted with their dark future selves.
You got 2 minutes to get off this ship. I don't know how we became you, but I sure as hell don't intend to help you carry on doing what you're doing.
You are destined to become us, and there's nothing you can do about it. In the end, you'll help us.
20 seconds, into the airlock and git.
The conflict leads to a shocking final battle where most of the Red Dwarf crew are killed off, leaving only Rimmer, who performs probably the first truly heroic act of his entire life. It's a truly shocking cliffhanger, and at the time, it was very possible this could have been the end of Red Dwarf altogether. As mentioned before, by Series 5 of Red Dwarf, a rift of sorts began to develop between the seemingly inseparable writing team of Rob Grant and Doug Naylor. Having created not just a hit show but a successful multimedia franchise, Rob Grant was increasingly of the opinion that he and Naylor should leave on a high and move on to something new. Naylor, on the other hand, aimed to double down on their immense success, going as far as to try and get a Red Dwarf movie off the ground. While the details are unclear, it seems this rift grew to a chasm between the two after Series 6. What began as a mere difference of opinion grew to incompatible career goals and even legal action.
It got so that we weren't doing anything else except Red Dwarf. We were doing the novels, we were doing the TV show, we were doing the American version, and in between we were sort of looking over games and all kinds of things. And I just felt like I'd had enough of that. I wanted to do something else.
They were together for so long, you know, since they were like small boys, you know, so the whole thing was slightly weird.
And I was at their office a lot at that time, so I would then sort of be there working on the script with that. And then, you know, Doug would be there pacing around worrying, and then Rob would walk in with lawyers, and you're going, what's going on? You know, it's all kind of, it got quite, you know, and I never knew what was going on. I don't know, I used to look at them through the partition screen in the office, try and lip read them. I want all the money. You can't have it, you bastard.
By the following year, it was clear that if Red Dwarf were to continue, it would be without Rob Grant.
Number 58.
Okay. Did you see a flame come out of it?
Didn't see a thing, Chris.
Compounding the problems for Series 7 was Chris Barry also choosing to leave the show. Filming Red Dwarf had always been difficult. Long hours, complicated shoots, and routine pickups after other shows had finished production. Barry, who had also been starring in the Brit-Ass Empire since 1991, found this demanding schedule extremely stressful. Therefore, for Series 7, Barry could only commit to appearing in 2 episodes as a full cast member, and 1 other in an extended cameo role. In Rimmer's place, Naylor hit upon the idea of resurrecting Lister's lost love, Christine Kochanski, an idea he and Grant actually had since Series 1. However, Claire Grogan, who originally played Kochanski, turned down the offer to join as a regular cast member. Thus, Naylor reworked the story so a version of Kochanski from a parallel reality would join the crew, played by Chloe Annette.
For the audition, what I read at the audition, she was quite strict, very, very intelligent, which is a challenge, and very professional, and bossy, which I am. It just felt right.
Annette took a keen interest in the creative industries from an early age, her father being a television director and mother an actress and voice coach. Before joining the Red Dwarf cast, she had appeared in the miniseries Jules, as well as the comedy drama shows Jeeves and Wooster, as well as All Creatures Great and Small. Around the same time she landed Red Dwarf, she made a further foray into science fiction in the short-lived series Crime Traveller. For Series 7, Doug Naylor wanted Red Dwarf to look even more cinematic, partly as a demonstration of what a feature film could look like. Because of this, Naylor and returning director Ed Bye chose to dispense with having a live studio audience. Instead, the completed episodes would be shown to an audience at a later date, where a laugh track would be recorded. This revamping of Red Dwarf's usual production schedule led to numerous delays and difficulties, especially when it came to the visual effects. In the interim between Series 6 and 7, the BBC effects department had actually moved several times, with the Red Dwarf unit eventually landing in a space at Shepperton Studios itself. While its proximity to the main filming was advantageous, the space the department was given was less than half the size of the studio used for previous series. Because of the move, a large chunk of the allocated budget was used simply equipping the new studio for the series, and during production, communications breakdowns hampered much of the miniature photography.
The scripts had evolved to the point where what we'd shot was no longer suitable for the story that was being told. It's just that at the point we'd shot them, that was what was needed. We simply didn't know what we were building from one day to the next. And the big opening sequence, jumping out of a bomber on the back of a crocodile, We had started work on Ace Rimmer fighting simulants, jumping out of a battle cruiser on the back of an alien. And then it's, oh no, everything changed. So again, another process where we'd started work, everything got pushed to one side, and quickly we need a crocodile.
Due to the botched schedule and rising costs of shooting miniatures, Naylor and Bai instead started to look into using computer-generated effects for Series 7.
I think there was about 4 or 5 weeks before they delivered to the BBC, and I ended up taking an animation that I'd done up to the edit suite, where they were finishing off Series 7 at the time, and showed that to Doug and Ed, and they kind of looked at it, and there was a sort of sequence of planet Earth, and there was a light kind of flying past towards the planet, and they were kind of going, can you put a spaceship in there instead?
If we hadn't used Chris, there would have just been black or missing bits or stories that just didn't make sense.
The more cinematic ambitions of Series 7 are certainly reflected on screen. Without the constraints of live studio filming, the entire look of the series is uplifted with some terrific looking lighting and location work. The only thing which holds the image quality back is the show still being shot on video as opposed to film. While there is a film grain filter applied in post, had the budget been there to shoot natively on 35mm, Red Dwarf Series 7 would have comfortably reached the production values of contemporary sci-fi shows. The visual effects, on the other hand, are a different story. Due to the chaotic miniature effects shoot and the last-minute implementation of CGI, Series 7's visual effects are inconsistent at best and terribly dated at worst. Many CG shots in particular have this strange motion blur effect, which kind of makes me feel like I'm getting a migraine each time I see it, and the digital matte paintings used to extend various sets and locations closer resemble levels from a 90s PC adventure game. The lower quality of visual effects is a real shame, as the rest of Series 7 looks fantastic. The Ridley Scott comparison I made for Series 5 is more than appropriate here as well. Among Red Dwarf fans, Series 7 can be quite divisive. It's a dicey prospect whenever a long-running show loses a core cast member, and considering how vital Rimmer was to the dynamic of the cast, his leaving presents a big risk for the show to say the least. I don't know if what I'm about to say is a hot take or anything, but in some ways I actually feel Rimmer leaving and Kochanski joining is a good thing for the show. Many of Red Dwarf's best episodes are very Rimmer-centric. His character is such a well of great comedy and such a useful tool in building elaborate sci-fi concepts around. However, because his character is so rich, sometimes this has the effect of sidelining the others. Of the preceding 36 episodes of Red Dwarf, Rimmer played a central role in 12 of them, whereas Lister, who is meant to be the protagonist in many respects, played a central role in only 9 episodes. Therefore, when Rimmer leaves in Series 7, opportunities are presented which give Lister, Crichton, Cat and Kochanski more time to shine. A new dynamic is created among the cast, and a new tone is established as well. Rather than always aiming for straight comedy, Series 7 is more like a comedy drama. That being said, in my opinion, Series 7 is just as funny as many previous series. Though on that note, I do think Series 7 is better with a laugh track. Because of its cinematic ambitions, some versions of Series 7 remove the laugh track entirely. However, the rhythm and timing of the comedy is still performed with a laugh track in mind. As a result, many of the jokes can feel awkward and slow when a laugh track isn't present.
The laser cannon breached the main water tank and flooded Supply Deck B. They didn't stand a chance.
Yeah, but surely...
There was nothing we could do to save them, sir.
So you mean... now we've got no poppadoms at all?
The laser cannon breached the main water tank and flooded Supply Deck B. They didn't stand a chance.
Yeah, but surely...
There was nothing we could do to save them, sir.
So you mean... now we've got no poppadoms at all?
Ironically enough, all of Series 7's strengths are clearly seen in Chris Barry's final full episode, Stoke Me a Clipper. As I mentioned in part 1, while Ace Rimmer's debut episode Dimension Jump is a solid enough outing for the show, Stoke Me a Clipper is easily the character's best appearance. Opening with a wonderfully absurd James Bond-inspired action sequence, we see Ace tussling with Nazis, air surfing crocodiles, and rocketing into the sky on a jet-powered motorbike. It's an extravaganza of silliness, but while a set piece like this would have been severely truncated in previous series, thanks to the single-camera shooting style of Series 7, the sequence has much more room to breathe. It reintroduces the fan-favourite character with an appropriate amount of overblown flamboyance. That high production value continues as we find Lister in another virtual reality game, this time a medieval setting featuring guest star Brian Cox. To any fan who suggests the show lost something comedy-wise in Series 7, I present to you the gold that is this scene.
The new answer? Lister of Smeg. Cheat 1. Code word, steed cheat. Ha!
However, it's Ace once again coming face to face with his smug git counterpart where the episode truly takes off and, for me at least, cements the legitimacy of Series 7's new creative direction. The revelation that Ace Rimmer is not in fact one man, but a title and persona passed on to an infinite number of Rimmers all across reality is an incredible idea. Furthermore, Ace choosing this version of Rimmer to take on the mantle is as funny as it is poetic. After all his pain and torment over his failures, all the cowardliness and pettiness which hurt those around him, finally Rimmer actually has a chance at becoming something better. Obviously, it's a challenge we as an audience expect him to fail, making it all the more remarkable when it seems like he actually has a chance of pulling it off.
I did it! That's the most heroic thing I've done since I set fire to Stinky Bateman's turnips in third form prep!
While Red Dwarf is a hugely successful comedy series, its pivot into more sincerely emotional territory in Series 7 is most welcome in my opinion, and equally as successful. Immediately following Stoke Me a Clipper is an intensely Lister-focused episode, Ouroboros. In many ways, Ouroboros is to Lister's character what Stoke Me a Clipper was for Rimmer, a celebration of the character with plenty of fun humour, but building up to a sincere, moving finale. The seeds of Lister's true destiny are so subtly planted throughout the show, it feels almost Babylon 5-esque. Lingering questions surrounding his upbringing.
Some cardboard box underneath the pool table. Just abandoned in this pub.
Oh, how could anybody do that?
Never found out. Never found out.
And the implication that he has some greater purpose.
You know that bit where Lister jump starts the second big bang?
Jump starts the second big bang.
Well, that's the final irony, isn't it? Lister, the ultimate atheist, turns out in fact to be God. What?
While both scenes are exploited for great jokes in the moment, it's clear Grant and Naylor had some other plans for Lister's character from an early stage. These plans reveal themselves in Ouroboros, when Lister discovers that he is in fact his own father, the result of an infinitely repeating temporal paradox.
For a long time, you'll think that you were abandoned, but you weren't, man. You were put here to create a paradox. With us going round and round in time, the human race can never become extinct. We're like a kind of holding pan. I'll see you, son.
To some fans, this apparent change in tone is what puts them off Series 7. However, I've always seen it as the show exploring something new, rather than turning into something else. All of the elements which made Red Dwarf great to begin with are still there, they're simply accompanied by something new. That something new is of course Christine Kochanski, who is also a controversial addition to the show. Chloe Annette has since spoken about how nervous she was when she joined the cast, and it's fair to say this is quite evident in her performance. Kochanski often comes across as uptight, overly serious. That is, at first, but as the series goes on, Annette clearly becomes more comfortable in the role and quickly gets to grips with the show's well-established comedic rhythm.
Have you ever listened to those clapped-out old pipes? New-reeking, then retutting, then just when you expect them to new-reek again, they squilluckle. It's enough to make a perfectly sane person crazy.
Another positive from her presence is the new dynamic created among the ensemble. Crichton's bitter rivalry with Kochanski as he turns into a jealous housewife overprotective of Lister is one of the most consistently funny threads in the series.
So it's making love to Kochanski or folding sheets with you. Can I do the final folding stack?
Absolutely.
Put the sheets then up.
You're lying! I'm not lying! Yes, you are!
And the many scenes of Kochanski just talking with Lister really make up the heart of the series.
You had to hate him. It was what kept you going.
I didn't know.
However, what's remarkable is how the tone of the series never feels messy. Crichton blowing up a bunch of Jane Austen characters in a tank and later pulling his brother's dead body from the wreck of a spaceship never feels jarring. This successful tonal balancing act is also apparent in the final 2 episodes, Epideme and Nanarchy. Although Gary Martin delivers plenty of laughs as the voice of Epideme,
I take it we're speaking with the Epideme virus.
Give that man an eyebrow. Hey, I'm feeling generous. Give him 2.
Lister slowly dying from an incurable virus, the solution to which leaves him with one arm, is given the appropriate amount of dramatic weight. Thankfully, however, things are looking up for the crew by series' end, with the fan-pleasing return of Norman Lovett.
So what, they fixed your core program and then decided they'd be better off without you?
Yeah, it was shortly after they'd met me.
And the resurrection of Red Dwarf itself. However, like all seemingly good things to happen to the Red Dwarf posse, they would soon discover there is a catch.
Seems even bigger than I remember. Guys, we got a problem!
It's not just me. Even your goldfish wince. Haven't you ever noticed how they cower under plants about when you're pussy for Galapagos?
You only come to watch you screw up, don't you?
Before gearing up for production on Red Dwarf Series 8, a side project for Grant Naylor Productions was a remastering of earlier episodes of the show. Doug Naylor had committed to a further 2 series, partly because it would give the show enough episodes to enter syndication internationally. While Red Dwarf had already reached the United States via PBS, there were other opportunities in markets like Japan and South America. However, Doug Naylor, Ed Bye, and the executives at BBC Worldwide all agreed the first 2 series were in too rough a shape to sell abroad. Therefore, Naylor and Bye took advantage of the advances in post-production technology to give Series 1 and 2 a whole new look. As well as a new colour grade, sound mix, and new CG effects, some live-action segments were shot. While the flyby shots of Red Dwarf used a CG model, a large miniature was also constructed. However, because it was so large, the camera literally didn't have enough room to film anything other than an extreme close-up. Norman Lovett was also brought back to redo some of his scenes as Holly. However, Naylor and Bye weren't fully satisfied with his performance, and thus most of his reshot material went unused. The reception to the remastered episode has been likened to the Star Wars Special Editions. While the picture quality is undeniably sharper and more vibrant, many of the digital effects were more controversial. In my opinion, it's a mixed bag. The new CG Red Dwarf is a design I've always liked, but other additions such as random scutters are quite baffling.
There's 2 mysterious scutters that appear in episode 1. They were put in there by God.
I have no idea how, where, what that came about.
My recollection is that we might have reshot them, but I think that Chris Veal made them.
I'm not guilty to that one. I don't know. I was trying to look at the tape the other day, trying to find the CG scutters, supposed CG scutters, and I'm 99% certain it wasn't me.
As it turns out, they're not CGI. Unearthed footage reveals that Ed was right the first time. Full-size scutters laid on with blue screen.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That was definitely my fault. Now, whether you think that was funny or not, I just thought it was kind of interesting at the time. But back to the old thing of once you've fallen in love with something and you really like it, you don't want it to see it changed.
Despite the mixed reception from existing fans, the remastered episodes did find success in syndication, and through further VHS and DVD sales. While this helped bring in new fans to the series, Naylor himself expressed disappointment with the final results. Together with a mixed fan reception and the expense of the process, only Series 1 through 3 were remastered. Ironically enough, thanks to the original show's Blu-ray release, the untouched versions of the first 3 series are actually available in better image quality than the remastered versions.
Do all the fans like it as much as the original series? I think there's an argument to say a lot of them don't. But to be fair, they did have a huge amount of fun and debate ripping it to shreds, so it wasn't completely a waste of time.
Series 8 of Red Dwarf saw another huge status quo shift. Although the nanites had rebuilt Red Dwarf, they had also resurrected its crew. This saw the return of Mac MacDonald as Captain Hollister, but also new additions to the cast such as Graham McTavish as Prison Warden Ackerman, and an assortment of other recurring characters. Rejoining the main cast to the delight of everyone was Chris Barry and Norman Lovett.
You had, like, Chris back. Where did he go? What's all that for? Where did you go, Chris?
Coming back to Red Dwarf was an easy decision to make. I knew by that point that there was never ever going to be in my life again a set of scripts that you look at and that you always laugh.
Chris was, a new man. And in fact, he was complaining about how quickly Britis was shot and how they didn't do the retakes and didn't have the care and the loving, of reshooting endlessly and keeping people hanging around.
The moments I remember of that is the kind of first read-through when suddenly we're all back in the same room going, oh, brilliant, oh, this is good.
There is no such thing as a brown alert, sir. You won't be saying that in a minute. And don't I didn't alert you. All the affairs on the screen.
I'd like to have been more involved, hand on my heart, like in the early days of having a really good scene. Like
he's moaning already. He's moaning about being brought back.
Yeah, he popped up occasionally to just entertain you with a little gag here and there.
Returning to Red Dwarf and running into the resurrected crew sees the ensemble thrown into a classified prison aboard the ship for a 2-year sentence. In many respects, Series 8 feels like a free sampling of all the best bits of the show by that point, or rather, an attempt at mixing together the elements different sects of the fanbase appreciated most. Getting Red Dwarf back gave the characters a real base again, rather than desperately scavenging in Starbug. However, their status as prisoners means they're still the underdogs in a new and scary environment. And thanks to Chris Barry and Craig Charles having a much better relationship at the time, the much-loved bunk scenes of Series 1 and 2 return. Yet thanks to the characters also joining the Canaries, we still get plenty of high-concept sci-fi adventures which characterized Series 3 through 7. On reflection, many of the cast and crew have named Series 8 as the series they had the most fun on, and this is evident on screen. For Series 8, it was also decided to bring back the live studio audience, a prospect the cast relished. As far as I'm concerned, Series 8 is actually the most consistently funny series of the entire show. Having even more characters for the regulars to bounce off and a live audience to play to results in some of the funniest extended gags in the series.
My captain, sir.
Let's go kill something! Yeah!
Rimmer, is this salute ever gonna end?
Yeah, it's got like big teeth and claws and like loads of heads.
Yeah, great!
It's my very special, extra long salute I reserve for the especially important, sir.
Here we go! Hello! Yeah!
You showered the girls.
Oh, so hideously dull, I can't describe it. As they stand around soaping themselves, their bodies all wet and foamy. Can you imagine it? Oh my goodness, we've been frozen in time again.
We're not frozen in time, Critey. We were just thinking about what you were saying.
Mac MacDonald and Graham McTavish are truly welcome additions to the cast. The scenes taking place in Captain Hollister's office become a highlight of every episode. While the playful insults between Lister and Rimmer are still there, they become more like partners in crime for Series 8, their many botched schemes and disorderly antics getting them sent to Captain Hollister's office like school children being sent to the head teacher. Graham McTavish, on the other hand, is a riot as the sadistic and psychotic Ackerman.
While on paper he was made to resemble Clancy Brown's character from The Shawshank Redemption, McTavish injecting his own disturbing backstory into the character turns him into one of Red Dwarf's most memorable villains.
Well, Graham McTavish as Ackerman, I mean, that to me was just one of my abiding memories of the whole series.
In real life, extremely charming, but when he did the sort of walkie up to you and do the pointy aggression thing, I was quite frightened.
I think he's a man who enjoys the company of women, or at a push, men dressed as women. Dad who was a traffic warden, mother maybe works for the Inland Revenue. The kind of man that sees pain as an essential part of any career path. A lot of uniforms, a lot of admiring dad in the uniform, a lot of maybe dressing up like my dad, maybe dressing up like my mum. He has a vivarium, I think, a lot of snakes in his life. Likes looking at things that are sort of cold and reptilian. He's not hurting anybody, well, not much. And one that I never actually discussed with them, but I would have loved to have shown how big my arsenal is in outer space. It's the big, did you know, he has the biggest arsenal in outer space. Very, very extensive. Lots of crossbows.
My personal favourite double act in Series 8, however, is Kochanski and Crichton.
Why have the nanobots done this? Put us in this situation?
In the past, they've only ever done things which have ultimately benefited us, like when they first stole Red Dwarf and took us on a merry goose chase halfway around the galaxy. They led us to Legion, where Mr. Rimmer acquired a hard light body. And then they took us back to Red Dwarf and rebooted Holly.
Benefits. And after that, they led you to the temporal rip where you met me.
It's a no-brainer to take two characters who hate each other and force them to live together. Thus, when Crichton is classified as a woman due to his lack of male genitalia, he and Kochanski have to become begrudging allies with brilliant results. After another long wait for more Red Dwarf, Series 8 kicks things off with a 3-part epic Back in the Red. Back in the Red is essentially a conveyor belt of Red Dwarf greatness, with scene after scene of the best the show has to offer. We start things off with a classic Lister Rimmer bunk scene. As a teaser, it intrigues the viewer as we wonder how these two characters are back together, how they've ended up in prison, and why Rimmer isn't speaking to Lister. And then it's back to a classic two-hander scene with the chemistry between Barry and Charles better than ever.
It was an accident. An accident? You poured a whole tube of it over me, you disgusting, rotting, fetid piece of congealed monkey vomit.
Following this Series 1 throwback is an action set piece more akin to those seen in Series 6 and 7, as Starbug races through a rapidly shrinking Red Dwarf.
I suggest we move from Blue Alert to Red Alert, sir.
Forget red! Let's go all the way up to Brown Alert!
But there's no such thing as Brown Alert, sir.
You won't be saying that in a minute.
Capping things off with the ever-reliable Starbug finally meeting its end. And as the resurrected crew get to grips with their new circumstances, the razor-sharp comedy and elaborate set pieces just keep coming. Kat's medical exam.
You think I'm gonna have the dorky human heartbeat?
Let me hear it.
Crichton getting counselling.
I've also developed several rudimentary emotions, including fear. Oh my God, it's going to kill us! Sadness. Oh my God, it's killed us. And just lately, I'm proud to say I've got the hang of anger with rudimentary mindless violence.
Rimmer fending off women after taking the sexual magnetism virus, the blue midget dance, virtual reality antics, and so much more. A true Red Dwarf extravaganza, and at the time was the closest to a Red Dwarf movie us fans would ever get. For me, Back in the Red, it typifies so many of Series 8's strengths, and is such a great showcase of Series 8 as a whole that I was surprised to learn this is a divisive chapter of the show among fans. While I do think of Series 3 through 6 as quintessential Red Dwarf, Series 8 is also one of my favourites. On the other hand, the end of Series 8, and indeed the end of Red Dwarf itself at the time, is an episode I've always had mixed feelings about. After such epics as Back in the Red and Pete, the sci-fi adventure of Cassandra, and the contained comedy of Crikey TV, Only the Good has always seemed a little half-baked, to be honest. While there are highlights such as Rimmer arguing with a vending machine, and Lister and Rimmer drunk out of their minds in front of Ackerman, the main plot ultimately fizzles out. Rimmer's brief trip to a mirror universe is a nice bit of fun, but ends up repeating jokes we've seen before in the series. I've always preferred the originally filmed ending, where the Red Dwarf posse succeed in saving the ship and reclaim the vessel as their home for future adventures.
Up ahead, the captain and the crew. Shall I program the ship to slow down so they can board?
Full ahead, Mr. Crichton. I see no ships.
The actual ending of the episode, however, is similarly true to Rimmer's character, when all hope is lost and Rimmer has seemingly reached the end of his life.
We will travel to the Ribsticks, where you will place a coin.
Not today, matey.
In the mountain.
Remember, only the good die young.
It's a fitting way of rounding off this era of Red Dwarf, and I say era because, as some on-screen text assures us, this is not the end. Now, truth be told, the modern era of Red Dwarf is something I'm still catching up on, having only seen the first special and a handful of episodes. That being said, I thought it appropriate to quickly give my 2 cents on what I have seen so far. Red Dwarf's long-awaited return in 2009's Back to Earth wasn't the most auspicious start to a new era for the show. While there are a few laughs here and there, for the most part it's a fourth-wall-breaking, cheap-looking and baffling extended Blade Runner parody which is too slow and awkward to be really enjoyable. I'm sorry to say after viewing this, things didn't bode well for what came after. Thankfully, from what I've seen of the series after Back to Earth, modern Red Dwarf is actually pretty good. While its low budget continues to hold back the production values, the cast are still on top form, and there's still plenty of laughs and sci-fi thrills. While I'm yet to see anything which matches the quality of the original run at its height, it's still an enjoyable sci-fi comedy which I'm happy to continue watching. Even in spite of its more recent stumbles, there will always be a special place in my heart for Red Dwarf. To paraphrase Arnold Rimmer, Red Dwarf as a show is like a fried egg chili chutney sandwich.
You see, all the ingredients are wrong.
A sitcom which threw out every convention of the genre, a science fiction series with barely enough money to create the ships and planets expected in such a series, it was a drama led by a cast with hardly any acting experience.
But put them together, and somehow it works. It becomes right.
Hysterically funny, endlessly creative, and genuinely moving when it wants to be. It's a show I always come back to be engrossed by the characters, stimulated by its ideas, and delighted by its humour. There's simply nothing else quite like Red Dwarf. Thank you for watching. Leave the video a like, and if you want to stay up to date on future uploads, hit the subscribe button and bell icon. You can also see videos early, uncut, and ad-free by joining me on Patreon. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank all of my patrons and members with an ultra thanks to Ian Feebig, Alex Miller, Eamon Kelly, Michael Hardy, Ian Hodge, County Ark, Mike Halsey, Retro PC Gamer, Benjamin Stokes, Hiroshi the Dog, Movie Magic, Charles Borsam, Olivia Computer, Bano, Extreme Streamers, Tom, Dusk, Colin Camille, Patrick Fleming, Matthew Camille, Ed Mark Starr, Dylan Thomas, Lilac Yane, Howard Craig Kervik, and Caging G. Thank you once again for watching, and until next time, have a good one.